This is the ideal quarter horse, and this is also a quarter horse. So what the hell happened in between? Today we're diving into the history of halter horses, where a discipline meant to showcase balance and function spiraled into extreme controversy and even genetic disease. Halter horses were supposed to represent the perfect stock horse. Instead, they became one of the most controversial chapters in American stock horse history. This is the story of how we got here. When the American Quarter Horse Association founded in 1940, halter classes were originally designed to evaluate a horse's conformation, to score it on its overall shape, balance, and structure. Back then, the breed was highly performance-oriented for both work and recreation and favored ranch-type horses who were balanced, athletic, and ultimately functional. The year is 1941, and the very first AQHA show is being held in Stamford, Texas. A horse named Del Rio Joe just became the association's first grand champion, a foundation horse who resembled the working horses of the West. Skipper W was also making a name for himself during this time, and even today this horse is a point of contention in terms of opinion, infamous in the sort of way that Hancock descendants are. Some love them and others cannot stand them. Breeders were also struggling with outcrop horses that were expressing too much white to be registered with the AQHA. So in 1962, enthusiasts began their own association, known as the American Paint Horse Association. With many of their horses heavily influenced by quarter horse bloodlines, the standards would often mirror those of the AQHA. The 60s brought us halter horses like Two-Eyed Jack, who himself had halter and performance points and produced many halter and performance winners. Ricky Bonanza was born later in the decade and still maintained a functional build that was suitable for work despite specializing in the halter arena. By the late 1960s, the AQHA was trying to standardize the ideal. Comes 1968. Artist Orrin Mixer is brought in to paint the perfect American quarter horse. The artist claimed that the work was a product of his own imagination, that he didn't take any particular horse to model his work after, though many swore they could see real horses reflected in it, even claiming that it was their own horse that was the model. It never bothered Mixer, as he's noted saying, if it makes them feel good about their horses, that's fine by me. One story recounts a diverse halter committee struggling to agree on judging criteria, until trainer Jerry Wells pointed at the Mixer painting on the wall and said, "That's it. That is what I'm looking for." And the committee unanimously agreed. Following suit, the APHA also contacted Mixer in the coming years, where he was hired to paint the American Paint and the Sire. Both paintings still hang on the walls of the breed's headquarters. So the question remains, if everyone is in agreement that this is the perfect stock horse, how did we get from this to this? In the 60s and 70s, showing became more lucrative and horses became more specialized. Perhaps borrowed from cattle judging styles, more heavily muscled horses began seeing favor in the halter. Now let's take a step back into the 1970s. This is where things get really interesting. We begin to see a rise in weanling and yearling halter classes. With more money to be made, breeders began producing foals specifically for the halter ring. Foals began to show more muscling as breeders chased aesthetics in exchange for money and titles. In the 70s, we saw horses like Major Bonanza, Sonny D. Bar, and Zan Parbar. But there was another horse that we need to look at for full context. On April 15th in 1969, a colt was born in California to the name of Triple Bars with the AQHA as he traced back thrice to 3 bars. The colt is sold for $3,500. His new owners, unable to stop referring to him as such, changed his name. Impressive landed in show rings across the country in 1970. Word rippled throughout the community of what a great and special horse he was. After his yearling year, he was sold for $20,000 and then again for $40,000. At some point, the stallion was sent off to race training under the ownership of Fennel Brown, but he never made it to the track due to a diagnosis of pedal osteitis. Fennel Brown was also offered $300,000 for the stallion and turned it down. He said that there wasn't a man rich enough who could buy that horse. In context, $300,000 back then is over $2.5 million by today's standards. At the height of his popularity, a breeding too impressive would cost someone $15,000. Today, that's over $128,000. Regardless of the fees, people flocked to the stallion. He sired 2,251 foals across the span of 24 crops. The legend became a sire of legends, such as Noble Tradition, Mr. Impressive, Conclusive, Tardy Impressive, The Graduate, Impressive Dandy, and more. Today, it's estimated that this sire has over 100,000 descendants. By the mid-1970s, veterinarians began noticing strange muscle tremors, weakness, and collapse in certain horses. At the time, the cause was a mystery. By the 1980s, more cases were reported, especially among descendants of Impressive. In 1985, researchers formally documented the condition, hyperkalemic periodic paralysis, otherwise known as HYPP. Horses like Obvious Conclusion and Skip Agent were doing well at the time, both from different styles of breeding but sharing more in common than not, still ultimately functional despite having a certain aesthetic. The 1990s was the beginning of the extreme halter type, with sires like Kid Clue representing a hypermuscular and specialized look. While these horses often had difficulty under saddle, they flourished in the halter ring. The 90s also gave rise to other halter greats like Mr. Yellowfella. In 1992, geneticists confirmed HYPP was caused by a dominant mutation that affected sodium channels in the muscle cells, and every single case traced back to the big red stallion Impressive. In 1996, the AQHA began requiring testing of Impressive's descendants, and results would be disclosed in registration papers. Carriers, NH horses, were still able to be registered, but the genie was out of the bottle by now. Halter horses were essentially a separate type from performance horses. And if you look back, you'll notice that Impressive sired Conclusive. Conclusive sired Obvious Conclusion. Obvious Conclusion sired Kid Clue. Each of these horses was NH for HYPP, and each a legend in their own right. Within a decade of learning what it truly was, HYPP went from a stain to a commodity. From then on, Impressive became the most controversial sire of all time. Horses suffered with the affliction. People learned how to manage it, but sometimes even that wasn't enough. Horses died. The public didn't understand why you'd pursue something so detrimental to the horse when it could so easily be bred out of existence. And for what? Aesthetics? So finally, in 2004, the AQHA announced that they would no longer allow registration of horses that were homozygous positive. Any horse born after January 1st, 2007, who tested HH would not qualify for registry. The decision was a positive turning point, but by then halter horses were widely seen as a caricature of the breed. Critics argued that halter horses had become unsound and exaggerated with structural problems that made them unsuitable for real work. To address this, the AQHA and APHA revised their guidelines. They introduced performance halter where classes were restricted to horses who had performance points. The horses had to prove that they could do a job before being judged. Incidentally, in 2007, the World Conformation Horse Association was founded, keeping the extreme halter niche alive outside of the associations. This image displays their standard, and I've left a link to the standards guidebook below, and you can formulate your own opinions. From the 2010s and onwards, the discipline has struggled. The court of public opinion has seemingly had some effect, even if progress is slow. Classes are smaller, and performance halter continues to gain traction as a more functional alternative. A handful of breeders still produce the most extreme halter types, but there is a slow, if stubborn, return to valuing usable, versatile horses. So questions remain. Halter was meant to showcase the ideal horse, and Mixer's painting captured that for generations. Somewhere along the way, the ideal became distorted from functional to freakish. And where do we go from here? We still have breeders, exhibitors, and judges happily showing horses with genetic defects like HYPP and even seeking it out. Where there's money and fame to be had, it's ultimately the responsibility of the association to course correct. But what's there to be done when the same people profiting from the system are in charge of it? When the ideal becomes a caricature, maybe it's time to redraw the picture, or maybe it's time to reference the one that's already been drawn. Mixer painted the perfect stock horse, but today we're left with the distorted reflection of that dream. Do you think Halter can ever recover, or is it too far gone? Thank you for joining me on this Halter horse history. Remember, keep your horses balanced, your hands light, and your perspective open. Till next time.